Have you ever imagined the heartbreak of losing 5 of your children in a single night, without a trace? It was Christmas Eve, 1945, in the quiet town of Fayetteville, West Virginia. The war had ended, families were trying to rebuild their lives, and the Sodder family, a hard-working Italian-American household, was settling in for a peaceful night. The tree was decorated, gifts had been opened, and 5 of the 10 Sodder children were allowed to stay up late, playing with new toys by the warm fire. But in the early hours of Christmas morning, a fire broke out in their 2-story home. The blaze consumed the house in less than an hour. When the fire was finally extinguished, the unthinkable became reality. Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, ages 5 to 14, were gone. But what truly haunts this case is not just the fire, it's what was never found. No bodies, no remains, not a single bone. What followed was a lifetime of questions, suspicions, and theories. The Sodder parents, George and Jenny, would spend the rest of their lives searching for answers, building roadside billboards, hiring private investigators, and challenging official reports that offered no real closure. This is more than just a story about a fire. It's about the resilience of a family that refused to believe their children simply vanished into the flames. It's about contradictions in witness reports, missing evidence, and a mystery that has puzzled generations for nearly 80 years. Today, we're diving into one of America's most haunting unsolved mysteries, the missing Sodder children. All of the details you'll hear are based on verified records, from FBI documents, local newspapers, and historical archives, presented with care, without speculation, and with respect for the family's decades-long search for the truth. To understand how this mystery began, we have to go back to the beginning, to a time before the fire, to the Sodder family. To truly understand the mystery of the missing Sodder children, we need to understand the family behind the story. In 1945, Fayetteville, West Virginia, was a small coal mining town nestled in the Appalachian Mountains. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Quiet streets, modest homes, and a tight-knit community recovering from the impact of World War II. Among its residents was the Sodder family, Italian immigrants who had built a life from the ground up. George Sodder, born Giorgio Soddu in Sardinia, Italy, immigrated to the United States as a teenager. He was ambitious, hardworking, and eventually started his own trucking company hauling coal. His wife, Jenny, was also of Italian descent, and together they raised 10 children in a large 2-story timber house just outside of town. They were, by all accounts, a loving and devoted family. George was known for his strong work ethic and vocal political opinions, especially his fierce criticism of Mussolini, which sometimes stirred tension among fellow Italian Americans in the area. Jenny, meanwhile, was the heart of the household. She cooked every meal from scratch, kept the home in order, and tucked her children into bed every night with a lullaby. The Sodders weren't wealthy, but they were proud of what they had built. Their home was always filled with the sounds of children's laughter, piano music, and the steady rhythm of a working-class family that stuck together. On Christmas Eve 1945, the mood in the Sodder home was joyful. Presents had been opened and the 5 younger children, Maurice, 14 years old, Martha, 12 years old, Louis, 9 years old, Jenny, 8 years old, and Betty, 5 years old, were allowed to stay up past bedtime to play with their new toys. Jenny and George, along with their older children, had gone to bed early. The house slowly quieted down, the lights dimmed, and the night settled in. No one could have imagined that it would be the last night the family would ever spend together under the same roof. There had been no serious warning signs, no known enemies, no reason to think anything was wrong. That's what makes the case so unsettling. Not what was known, but what was missing. No threats, no signs of trouble, just a seemingly ordinary family on an ordinary night. And that's perhaps the most haunting part. Jenny would later recall the small, tender details of that evening. The way Betty insisted on keeping the ribbon from her new doll. How Louis had fallen asleep in the armchair before being coaxed upstairs. Jenny had hummed them a lullaby, just like she always did. But this time, it would be the last. Can you imagine hearing your child's laughter echo through the hall one moment, then waking to silence the next? That's the emotional weight that has kept this story alive for generations. What happened to the Sodder children defies simple explanations. But before we get to the night of the fire, before the unanswered questions and the strange clues, we have to look at what changed everything. Because in just a few hours, a fire would reduce the Sodder home to ashes, and 5 of their children would disappear into the night. In the early hours of Christmas morning, December 25th, 1945, something went terribly wrong. At around 12:30 a.m., Jenny Sodder was awakened by the sound of the telephone ringing. She went downstairs to answer it, only to hear a strange woman's voice asking for someone Jenny didn't know. In the background, laughter, clinking glasses, a party atmosphere. Jenny told the caller she had the wrong number, hung up, and noticed the house was unusually quiet. The lights were still on, the curtains open, the front door unlocked. She assumed the children had forgotten to tidy up before heading to the attic room, where they often slept together during holidays. She turned off the lights, closed the curtains, locked the door, and returned to bed. But around 1 a.m., she was jolted awake again, this time by a loud thump on the roof, like something had landed. Then came the smell of smoke. Jenny rushed out of bed and found that the house was on fire. Flames were crawling through George's office, near the fuse box. She screamed for her husband and children, and within seconds, the entire house was filling with smoke. George, Jenny, and 4 of the children, Marion, Sylvia, John, and George Jr., managed to escape. But 5 children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, were nowhere to be found. Outside in the cold, chaos unfolded. George tried to re-enter the house, but the staircase was already consumed by flames. He ran to grab his ladder to reach the attic window, where he believed the children were trapped. But the ladder, which had always been propped up against the side of the house, was missing. He then tried to start his 2 work trucks to drive them up to the house and climb from the roof. Neither would start, despite having worked perfectly the day before. In the meantime, Marion ran to a neighbor's house to call the fire department. The operator didn't respond. Another neighbor tried from a nearby tavern, but again, no help came. Eventually, a driver passing through town managed to reach the fire chief, F.J. Morris. But due to a wartime shortage of personnel and a strange phone tree system in place, the fire department didn't arrive until 8 a.m., almost 7 hours after the fire had started. By that time, the Sodder home was reduced to a pile of ash and rubble. The fire itself had burned for only about 45 minutes. Yet what came next was more troubling. Rescue crews searched the remains and found nothing. No bones, no teeth, no trace of the 5 missing children. Authorities concluded that the fire had been hot enough to completely cremate the bodies. But that explanation didn't sit well with George and Jenny. They had seen other house fires before and knew that some trace, however small, should have remained. What made things even more disturbing were the unusual details that didn't quite add up. The missing ladder was later found in a ditch 75 feet away from the house. The phone line had been deliberately cut, not damaged by fire. A man had been seen stealing a block and tackle from the Sodders' property days earlier, and was questioned but never charged. And later, a witness came forward, saying they'd seen balls of fire being thrown at the roof around the time of the fire. All of these details cast doubt on the official conclusion that the children had simply died in the fire. Jenny, desperate for answers, went so far as to conduct her own experiment. She burned animal bones in her kitchen stove. Nothing ever disintegrated completely. A cremation expert later confirmed. It would take temperatures of over 2,000 degrees for several hours to fully destroy a human body. The Sodder house fire didn't burn nearly that long, or that hot. So the question remains, if the children died in the fire, where are their remains? And if they didn't die in the fire, then what happened to them? These questions would haunt the Sodder family for the rest of their lives. And they didn't sit idle. They began their own investigation, gathering clues, chasing leads, and putting up one of the most famous billboards in American cold case history. The fire at the Sodder home was ruled an accident. The official cause, faulty wiring. A tragic electrical malfunction in the middle of a quiet Christmas Eve. But to George and Jenny Sodder, something about that conclusion never quite made sense. From the very beginning, there were inconsistencies, details that gnawed at their instincts. Most troubling of all, no bodies were ever found. 5 children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, vanished into the flames, and yet not a single trace of them was recovered. No bones, no teeth, nothing. Authorities claimed the fire was hot enough to reduce the children's remains to ash. But the Sodders didn't buy it. Jenny, determined to find answers, began conducting her own research. She burned animal bones in their stove, trying to recreate the conditions. No matter how long or hot the fire burned, the bones remained. Even a local crematorium supported her findings. Cremation requires temperatures of 1,400 to 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit for at least 2 hours to destroy human bone. The fire at the Sodder house? It lasted about 45 minutes. That discrepancy became the cornerstone of the family's doubts. And then, there were the strange details. First, the phone line. The family's telephone stopped working during the fire. Later, a repairman confirmed the line hadn't burned. It had been cut. Second, the ladder. The one George always kept propped against the house was missing the night of the fire. Days later, it was found tossed down an embankment some 75 feet away. Third, the truck. George had tried to use his coal trucks to rescue the children from the upper floors, but both vehicles inexplicably failed to start, though they had worked perfectly the day before. Even stranger, Jenny recalled hearing something hit the roof just before the fire broke out, a loud, thudding sound. Some believed it could have been a type of incendiary device. And then there was George himself. A vocal opponent of Mussolini and fascism, he had reportedly received threats in the weeks leading up to the fire. One man, visiting the home to inquire about work, pointed to the fuse box and said, "This is going to cause a fire someday." Another, a life insurance salesman, turned hostile when George refused a policy, warning him that his house would go up in smoke and his children would be destroyed. Coincidence or something more? As word of the case spread, so did the theories. Theory 1, a tragic accident. Some believed it really was just a horrific accident. An overloaded circuit, a faulty wire near the Christmas lights. Perhaps the fire burned hotter than expected, fueled by the coal stored in the basement. But that theory struggles to hold under scrutiny. The fire didn't last long enough to cremate 5 bodies. And all of the other household appliances and furniture left behind? Still recognizable in the ashes. Theory 2, kidnapping. Then came the theory that changed everything. What if the children hadn't died at all? What if they'd been taken? Several witnesses claimed to have seen the children in the days and weeks following the fire. A woman reported seeing them peering out of a car window as the fire raged. Another, in Charleston, said she saw them at a tourist stop accompanied by 2 men and 2 women speaking Italian. Some believed the kidnapping was politically motivated, an act of revenge against George's anti-fascist views. Others suggested ties to the Italian mafia, especially after reports surfaced of a man overheard bragging that the children had been taken and were safe, but would never be returned. Theory 3, a local conspiracy. A few people pointed to the possibility of a more local plot, maybe even something deeply personal. In a small town like Fayetteville, secrets can hide in plain sight. Could someone have used the fire as a cover for a crime? A bus driver came forward claiming to have seen fireballs being thrown at the house the night it burned. That aligned with Jenny's memory of hearing something hit the roof. Yet this lead was never thoroughly investigated. Other tips trickled in for years. A woman wrote claiming she knew where the children were. A man from Florida claimed Lewis was living there under an assumed name. In 1967, George received a photo of a young man who looked eerily similar to what Lewis might look like in his 20s. On the back, someone had written, "Lewis Sodder. I love Brother Frankie. Ill boys. A 90132 or 35. The photo was the last solid lead the family would ever receive. The Sodders' relentless search. George and Jenny refused to give up. They put up a massive billboard on Route 16 with the children's photos, a timeline of events, and a reward. For decades, it remained a haunting landmark, a constant plea for truth. They hired private investigators, traveled across states chasing leads, questioned psychics, but nothing ever led to a conclusive answer. The authorities remained firm. There was no evidence of foul play. No remains meant no crime, as far as they were concerned. But to the Sodders, and to many who've studied the case, there were simply too many questions left unanswered. Where the case stands today, as of 2025, the case remains officially unsolved. The FBI closed its file long ago, citing lack of jurisdiction. The fire destroyed most of the physical evidence, and the witnesses who once held possible answers have long passed. But the mystery endures. 5 children vanished without a trace on Christmas Eve. And for decades, a family asked the world one question: what really happened to the Sodder children? Was it a freak accident? Or was it something far more deliberate? Fire can destroy a home, but 5 lives completely and without a trace? That stretches belief. So what do you think? Was it tragedy or a well-orchestrated cover-up? It's been nearly 80 years since that tragic Christmas Eve in 1945, when 5 Sodder children vanished into a fire that left behind more questions than answers. No remains were ever recovered. No solid proof of what happened has ever come to light. And yet, George and Jenny Sodder spent the rest of their lives chasing shadows, clinging to hope, and refusing to let the world forget. Their determination turned this case into more than just a mystery. It became a symbol of grief, resilience, and the human need for truth. We've seen the inconsistencies: the missing ladder, the cut phone line, the trucks that wouldn't start, and the witnesses who claimed to have seen the children alive. We've weighed the theories: accident, kidnapping, conspiracy. And yet, nothing ever quite explains it all. It's easy to feel haunted by a story like this, because at its core, it's not just about a fire or a disappearance. It's about a family who went to bed on Christmas Eve and woke up to a nightmare that never ended. So now we turn to you. What do you think really happened to the Sodder children? Was it a tragic accident? Or something darker, planned, deliberate, hidden? We want to hear your theory. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your insights, your perspective could help keep this conversation and the memory of these children alive. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Cold Case Mystery, The Missing Sodder Children. If stories like this move you, if you believe these mysteries deserve to be explored, subscribe to stay connected. We cover real cases with respect, depth, and heart. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and never stop asking questions.